Every road trip starts with the promise of freedom, the open highway, the thrill of the unknown, and the sense that anything can happen. But what if the unknown is far darker than you ever imagined? Welcome to Verified Fears Horror Stories channel, where true tales of terror from the open road will make you question every mile you travel. Tonight, I'm sharing the 12 most disturbing real-life road trip horror stories. Accounts so chilling, you'll never look at an empty highway the same way again. If you think you're brave enough to handle the truth, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and share your own terrifying road trip experience in the comments below. Let's see who can make it to the end without looking over their shoulder. Because on this channel, the fear is always real. There's a silence that settles over the wilds of northern British Columbia that feels ancient, almost sentient. It's the kind of silence that creeps into your bones, that makes you realize just how far you are from the rest of the world. For Ethan and Mark, two brothers on the cusp of adulthood, that silence was both a promise and a warning as they set out on their long-anticipated summer road trip in the mid-1990s. Ethan, the older at 18, was eager to taste freedom before college, while Mark, 16, was content to follow his brother's lead, trusting him implicitly, as younger siblings often do. Their journey began with the kind of excitement that only youth and a full tank of gas can bring. They had mapped out a route that would take them from their small hometown in southern British Columbia all the way to the rugged coast of Prince Rupert. Their parents, a little nervous but supportive, had insisted on daily phone calls and pressed emergency cash into their hands. The brothers laughed off the warnings, convinced that nothing bad ever really happened on the open road. The first 2 days passed in a blur of pine forests, mountain vistas, and roadside diners. They camped by lakes and swapped ghost stories by the fire, their voices echoing into the vastness. It wasn't until the third day, as dusk settled over Highway 37, that the mood began to shift. The highway was a ribbon of cracked asphalt winding through endless trees, the kind of place where the world feels pared down to just you and the road. Mark watched the gas gauge dip lower and lower, his anxiety rising with every passing mile. Ethan, ever the optimist, assured him they'd find a rest stop soon. But as the sun bled out behind the trees, it became clear they were alone. When they finally spotted a gravel pull-off, half hidden by overgrown brush, it felt like a relief. They parked at the far end, away from the road, and killed the engine. The silence that followed was immediate and total, broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine and the distant call of an owl. They ate a cold dinner on the hood of the car, watching the last light fade. Mark tried to call home, but his phone displayed only a single bar before flickering to no service. He didn't mention it to Ethan, not wanting to seem childish. They climbed into the car, locked the doors, and tried to get comfortable. Mark curled up in his sleeping bag, listening to the forest breathe around them. He tried to focus on the rhythm of Ethan's breathing, steady and calm. But his mind kept conjuring images of bears, wolves, and the other, nameless dangers that might be lurking just beyond the tree line. Sleep came fitfully, broken by strange dreams and the occasional snap of a twig outside. At some point, Mark woke with a start, heart pounding, unsure what had roused him. The car was cold and damp, the windows fogged with their breath. For a moment, he lay still, listening. Then he heard it, a faint crunching sound, like footsteps on gravel, slow and deliberate. He held his breath, straining to see through the condensation. At first, there was nothing, just the vague shapes of trees and the reflection of his own pale face. Then, movement, a shadow passing close to the car, too tall and upright to be an animal. Reached over and shook Ethan's shoulder, whispering his name. Ethan groaned and sat up, rubbing his eyes. Mark gestured for silence, his hand trembling. Together, they listened. The footsteps came again, louder this time, circling the car. Ethan's face went pale. He reached for the keys, but in the darkness and panic, fumbled them onto the floor. Suddenly, a face appeared at the driver's side window. It was close enough that Mark could see the lines etched into the man's skin, the wild look in his eyes. The man grinned, revealing yellowed teeth, and pressed his hand flat against the glass. Mark recoiled, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Another figure appeared at the rear window, then another at the passenger side. In total, Mark counted 5 men, all dressed in dark, ragged clothes, their faces gaunt and hungry-looking. One of them tried the passenger door, rattling the handle. Another began tapping on the glass with something metallic. A knife, Mark realized with a jolt of terror. Men moved with a strange, predatory patience, as if they were used to waiting for prey to make a mistake. Ethan finally found the keys, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped them again. He jammed them into the ignition and turned. The engine sputtered, then roared to life, the headlights illuminating the men in stark, unnatural light. For a split second, they froze, caught in the glare like startled animals. Then, as if on cue, they surged forward, pounding on the windows and doors. Ethan slammed the car into drive and floored the accelerator. The tires spun on the loose gravel before catching, and the car lurched forward, narrowly missing one of the men who stumbled back with a snarl. Mark looked back as they sped onto the highway, his vision swimming with tears of relief and terror. The men stood at the edge of the pull-off, watching them go, their faces blank and unreadable. They drove for miles in silence, the only sound the roar of the engine and their own ragged breathing. Ethan's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Mark stared out the window, half expecting to see headlights in the rearview mirror or figures running alongside the car. When they finally reached a truck stop, bathed in harsh fluorescent light, they pulled in and sat for a long time, neither willing to get out. Eventually, Ethan managed to call their parents, inventing a story about car trouble. They didn't mention the men or the terror that had nearly consumed them. It felt unreal, like a nightmare they'd shared. That night, they slept in shifts, always keeping one eye on the parking lot. Ethan tried to laugh it off, but Mark could see the fear lingering in his eyes. For the rest of the trip, they refused to stop anywhere that wasn't crowded and well lit. They avoided side roads and pull-offs, sticking to the main highways even when it meant driving hours out of their way. The memory of those faces, pressed against the glass, haunted them both. When they finally made it home, they tried to put the incident behind them. But some nights, when the world was quiet and the shadows seemed to move on their own, Mark would wake up gasping, certain he could hear footsteps outside his window. Ethan grew distant, haunted by guilt. He blamed himself for stopping in such an isolated place, for not protecting his brother. The brothers grew up, went to college, started families of their own, but the memory never faded. The fear, once planted, took root and grew. Years later, Mark found himself driving that same stretch of highway, unable to resist the pull of the past. The forest looked the same, tall, dark, and endless. He slowed as he passed the pull-off, half expecting to see the men standing there, waiting. But the lot was empty, overgrown with weeds. He parked for a moment, engine idling, and tried to make sense of what had happened all those years ago. He wondered if the men were drifters, escaped convicts, or something else entirely. The not knowing was almost worse than the memory itself. He asked around at local diners and gas stations, hoping for answers. Most people just shrugged. But one old-timer, a trucker with a face like worn leather, leaned in close and whispered, "You're lucky, kid. There's things in those woods that don't want to be found. People go missing out here all the time. Best not to ask too many questions." Mark left with more questions than answers, the old man's words echoing in his mind. Back home, he and Ethan talked about that night for the first time in years. They compared memories, trying to fill in the blanks. Ethan remembered the way the men moved, slow and deliberate, as if they weren't afraid of being caught. Mark remembered the cold, dead look in their eyes. They both remembered the overwhelming sense of helplessness, the certainty that they were completely alone. The story became a cautionary tale in their family. They warned their own children never to stop on deserted roads, never to trust the silence of the wilderness. They locked their doors religiously, even in the safest neighborhoods. The fear, once a shadow in the back of their minds, became a part of who they were. As the years passed, the memories softened around the edges, but never disappeared. Sometimes Mark would wake in the middle of the night, heart racing, convinced he could hear footsteps outside. He would lie in bed, holding his breath until the feeling passed. Other times, he would find himself staring out the window at the darkness, searching for movement, for any sign that the men had followed him home. Ethan struggled with nightmares, reliving the moment when the engine wouldn't start, when the men pressed closer, their faces inches from his own. He saw a therapist, tried to rationalize the fear, but it never completely went away. He wondered what would have happened if the car hadn't started, if they'd been forced to confront the men outside. The possibilities haunted him. Their parents eventually learned the truth, pieced together from fragments overheard in late-night conversations. Their mother wept. Their father grew quiet and withdrawn. The incident became a ghost in the family, haunting holidays and reunions, a reminder of how quickly life can change. Mark became obsessed with true crime, reading everything he could about disappearances and unsolved cases along remote highways. He found stories of hitchhikers who vanished, of cars found abandoned on the side of the road, of families who were never seen again. Each story felt like a piece of a puzzle he would never solve. He wondered how many others had encountered the men in the night, and how many hadn't been as lucky. The brothers eventually drifted apart, the trauma of that night creating a distance neither could bridge. They spoke less often, their conversations stilted and awkward. But the bond forged in fear remained, an unspoken understanding that no one else could share. As time wore on, the world changed. Cell phones became ubiquitous, GPS made it harder to get lost. But the wilderness remained, vast and indifferent. The road still wound through the same endless forests, and the silence was as deep as ever. Mark sometimes wondered if the men were still out there, waiting for the next car to pull off the highway, for the next pair of brothers to let down their guard. He never found out who they were or what they wanted. He never learned if they were killers, thieves, or something even darker. The not knowing became its own kind of horror. Question that would never be answered. In the end, the story of the men in the night became a legend in Mark's mind, a warning to anyone who would listen. He told his children, his friends, anyone who would listen, trust your instincts. Lock your doors. Never underestimate the darkness. And sometimes, when the world is quiet and the shadows are long, he remembers the feel of the cold glass against his skin, the sound of footsteps circling the car, and the certainty that evil can find you, even in the middle of nowhere. If you've ever had an experience on the road that made your blood run cold, share it in the comments below. And if this story kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to subscribe to Verified Fears Horror Stories channel for more true tales that will haunt your dreams. Stay safe out there. And remember, sometimes the real horror is closer than you think. Let's move on to our second story. A true account that will make you question every vehicle you see in your rearview mirror. The Patel family's road trip was supposed to be a celebration. Raj and Sunita had saved for months to take their two children, Arjun and Priya, on a cross-country journey from Vancouver to Toronto. It was the kind of trip that families dream about, a minivan packed with snacks, playlists, and the promise of adventure. For the first few days, everything went according to plan. They drove through the lush landscapes of British Columbia, marveled at the Rockies, and stopped at quirky roadside attractions, collecting memories as they went. By the time they reached the prairies of Saskatchewan, the novelty of the road had worn off. The kids bickered in the back seat, the snacks dwindled, and the endless stretches of highway began to blur together. It was on one of these monotonous stretches that the first hint of unease crept in. The family pulled into a small, dusty gas station just outside a town called Swift Current. The sun was high, the air thick with the scent of gasoline and wild grass. As Raj filled the tank, Sunita took the kids inside to use the restroom and pick up cold drinks. Inside the store, Sunita felt the weight of someone's gaze. She glanced up and saw a man standing by the magazine rack, eyes fixed on her. He was unremarkable, average height, thinning hair, a faded blue jacket. But there was something unsettling in the way he watched her, unblinking and intent. Sunita hurried the children along, paid for their purchases, and left the store with a tightness in her chest she couldn't explain. Back at the car, she whispered to Raj about the man, but he brushed it off. People stare, especially in small towns. Don't worry. She tried to believe him. They buckled the kids in, pulled out of the gas station, and merged back onto the highway, the incident already fading into the haze of travel fatigue. But within minutes, Sunita noticed the same man's car, a battered silver sedan, pull out of the gas station and fall in behind them. At first, she thought nothing of it. There weren't many roads out here, and it was only natural that another traveler would be heading east. But as the miles ticked by, the sedan remained a constant presence in the rearview mirror. It never got too close, never tried to pass. But it never fell far behind either. Sunita tried to distract herself with music, with conversation, with the endless task of keeping the kids entertained. But every time she glanced in the mirror, the sedan was there. She mentioned it to Raj, who shrugged. Coincidence, he said, but his voice was less certain this time. They stopped for lunch in Moose Jaw, pulling into a busy fast food restaurant. As they ate, Sunita watched the parking lot through the window. Sure enough, the silver sedan pulled in a few minutes later. The man didn't get out. He sat in his car, staring straight ahead, hands gripping the steering wheel. Sunita's unease deepened into fear. She tried to keep her voice steady as she told Raj, who grew visibly tense. "Let's just get back on the road," he said, hurrying the family out of the restaurant. Back on the highway, The sedan followed. It was always there, a silent shadow. Raj tried to lose him by taking an unexpected exit, doubling back through a small town and rejoining the highway miles later. For a brief, hopeful moment, the sedan was gone. The family relaxed, laughter returning to the car as the kids played games in the back seat. But as they merged onto the main highway again, Sunita's heart sank. The silver sedan appeared in the mirror, as if it had been waiting for them. The man's persistence was chilling. There was no reason for him to follow them, no sign of road rage or misunderstanding. He never flashed his lights, never tried to communicate. He simply followed, mile after mile, hour after hour. The children sensed the tension, their voices growing quieter as the day wore on. Arjun, the older of the two, asked if everything was okay. Sunita forced a smile and told him not to worry, but her hands shook as she adjusted the air conditioning. Raj gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. As the afternoon faded into evening, the family grew desperate. They tried calling the police, but cell service was spotty in the rural stretches. When they finally reached a dispatcher, they were told there wasn't much anyone could do. Unless he's threatening you or breaking the law, there's not much we can do, the officer said, his voice apologetic but firm. Try to stay in populated areas. But there were no populated areas, just endless fields, the occasional farmhouse, and the ever-present silver sedan. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the road. The minivan's headlights flickered on, illuminating the empty highway ahead. Behind them, the sedan's lights glowed like twin eyes, unblinking and relentless. As darkness fell, the family's fear grew. Every sound seemed amplified. The hum of the tires, the rattle of loose change in the cup holder, the nervous whispers between Raj and Sunita. The children fell asleep, curled up in the back seat, unaware of the danger that stalked them through the night. Raj tried to stay calm, but Sunita could see the fear in his eyes. "What does he want?" she whispered. Raj shook his head. "I don't know. But we can't stop. Not until we lose him." They drove on, hour after hour, exhaustion setting in. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, a ribbon of darkness bordered by fields and forests. Every so often they passed another car or truck, but the sedan always remained, never overtaking, never falling behind. At one point, Raj pulled into a rest area, hoping the presence of other travelers would deter the man. The sedan pulled in as well, parking at the far end of the lot. Raj waited, engine idling, watching the man through the rearview mirror. The man never moved, never looked away. After 10 minutes, Raj gave up and pulled back onto the highway. The sedan followed. Sunita's fear turned to anger. She rolled down her window at a stoplight in a small town and shouted at the man, demanding to know why he was following them. The man stared straight ahead, expressionless, as if he hadn't heard her at all. The light turned green, and the minivan sped off, the sedan close behind. By midnight, the family was near their breaking point. The children slept fitfully, waking now and then to ask if they were there yet. Sunita's nerves were frayed, her hands trembling as she clutched the seat. Raj's eyes were bloodshot, his voice hoarse from hours of whispered strategizing. Finally, they saw the lights of a large truck stop ahead, a beacon of hope in the darkness. Raj pulled in, parking as close to the entrance as possible. The lot was crowded with semis and travelers, the air thick with the smell of diesel and fried food. The sedan circled the lot slowly, the man's face hidden in shadow. For a moment, he seemed to hesitate. Then he pulled back onto the highway and disappeared into the night. The family sat in stunned silence, the relief almost overwhelming. They waited for half an hour, watching the road, but the sedan never returned. When they finally went inside, the harsh lights and noisy chatter felt like a sanctuary. They never saw the man again. The rest of their trip passed without incident, but the memory of that night haunted them. Sunita would wake in the night, heart racing, convinced she saw headlights outside her window. Raj became hypervigilant, checking the rearview mirror constantly, always wary of cars that lingered too long behind them. For years afterward, the family avoided road trips, choosing instead to fly or stay close to home. The children grew up, but the story became a family legend, a cautionary tale told at gatherings and holidays. Sunita would warn friends and relatives to trust their instincts, to never ignore the feeling of being watched. The experience changed them. They became more cautious, more aware of the dangers that lurk on the open road. The world felt a little less safe, a little more unpredictable. And every time they set out on a new journey, they couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror, haunted by the memory of the relentless stranger who turned their dream vacation into a waking nightmare. But the story didn't end there. Years later, Arjun, now a young man, found himself driving alone late at night, returning from a friend's wedding. As he merged onto the highway, he noticed a car behind him, headlights glaring in his mirror. For a moment, his heart raced, old fears rising to the surface. But the car passed him and sped off into the night, leaving him alone with his memories. He realized then how deeply the experience had affected him, how it had shaped his sense of the world. He called his mother the next day, telling her about the drive. Sunita listened, her voice gentle. "You're safe," she said, "but always trust your instincts." The Patel family's story is a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying threats are the ones that never reveal themselves, the dangers that lurk just out of sight. It's a story about fear, about the unknown, and about the power of family to endure even the darkest of nights. If you've ever felt the prickling sensation of being watched, if you've ever checked your mirror and seen the same car behind you for miles, you know how quickly the familiar can turn sinister. The open road is a place of freedom, but it's also a place of vulnerability, where the boundaries between safety and danger are razor thin. So the next time you set out on a journey, remember the Patel family. Remember to trust your instincts, to stay alert, and to never take your safety for granted. Because sometimes, the real horror isn't what you see ahead of you. It's what follows you, mile after mile, refusing to let you go. And if you have a story like this, if you've ever been followed, watched, or threatened on the road, share it in the comments below. Your experience might just be the warning someone else needs to stay safe. Don't forget to subscribe to Verified Fear's Horror Stories channel for more true tales that will keep you looking over your shoulder. Stay safe out there. And remember, sometimes the scariest things are the ones that never show their face. Let's move to our third story. A true account that proves sometimes the most terrifying dangers on the road are the ones that come disguised as kindness. The summer after their sophomore year, best friends Emily and Sarah decided to take a road trip across the American Midwest. They were both 20, full of restless energy and the kind of optimism that comes from never having been truly afraid. Their plan was simple: drive from their college town in Iowa to Denver, stopping at every oddball roadside attraction they could find. They packed their little blue hatchback with snacks, mixtapes, and a tent, promising their parents they'd stick to main roads and check in every night. It was supposed to be a trip they'd remember for the rest of their lives. And it was, but not for the reasons they'd hoped. The first 2 days were everything they'd imagined. They took selfies with giant fiberglass cows, ate pie at a diner shaped like a UFO, and camped beneath skies so wide and star-filled it made them feel tiny and infinite at the same time. They laughed about their parents' warnings, about horror movies where girls like them made all the wrong choices. "We're not stupid," Emily said, tossing her hair and grinning across the campfire at Sarah. "We know how to take care of ourselves." On the third day, they left Kansas City behind and headed west, the landscape flattening into endless fields of corn and wheat. The sun was high, the air thick and humming with the sound of insects. They sang along to the radio, windows down, hair whipping in the wind. It was the kind of day that felt like it could last forever. But by late afternoon, the car's gas gauge dipped lower and lower. Emily, who was driving, frowned at the dashboard. "We should have filled up back in that last town," she said, her voice tight with worry. Sarah pulled out her phone, but the signal was weak and the map wouldn't load. They passed a sign for a town called Harper, 10 miles ahead. "We'll make it," Emily said, trying to sound confident. They didn't. 5 miles later, the engine sputtered and died, the car coasting to a stop at the side of a narrow 2-lane road. The field stretched out on either side, golden and empty, the nearest farmhouse a distant smudge on the horizon. They sat in silence for a moment, the reality of their situation settling over them like a heavy blanket. "Well, shit," Sarah said finally, forcing a laugh. "At least it's not dark yet." They got out, stretching their legs and scanning the horizon. The road was empty, the only movement the wind rippling through the crops. Emily tried her phone. No service. Sarah climbed onto the roof of the car, waving her arms at the empty road. But no one came. An hour passed. The sun began to dip, the light turning soft and golden. Emily started to worry in earnest. "We need to get to that town before it gets dark," she said. "We can't just sit here all night." Sarah nodded, but before they could start walking, a battered white van appeared on the horizon, growing larger as it approached. Emily felt a surge of relief. Finally, someone who could help. The van slowed as it drew near, pulling over to the shoulder with a squeal of brakes. The driver's window rolled down, and a man in his late 30s leaned out, grinning. "Car trouble?" he called, his voice cheerful. Emily explained their situation, and the man nodded sympathetically. "Happens all the time out here," he said. "I can give you a ride into Harper. There's a gas station there. I'll even bring you back." Emily hesitated, glancing at Sarah. The man seemed friendly enough, clean-shaven, jeans and a faded t-shirt, a wedding ring glinting on his finger. But something in his eyes made her uneasy. Still, the sky was growing darker, and the prospect of walking 5 miles along an empty road was even less appealing. "Okay," she said finally. "Thank you. That's really kind." The man hopped out of the van and slid open the side door. Inside, the van was stripped of seats, the floor covered in stained carpet. 2 other men sat in the back, both in their 30s, both watching the girls with unreadable expressions. Emily's unease deepened, but she forced herself to smile. "Hi," she said, her voice trembling. The men nodded, saying nothing. The driver gestured for the girls to climb in. Emily hesitated, but Sarah, ever the bolder of the two, shrugged and climbed inside. Emily followed, heart pounding. The van smelled of sweat and old cigarettes. The driver got back behind the wheel, pulling onto the road with a lurch. Emily sat as close to Sarah as possible, clutching her purse in her lap. The men in the back watched them, silent. For a few minutes, no one spoke. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the rattle of loose tools in the back. Emily tried to make conversation, asking about the town, but the men gave only curt answers. The driver glanced at her in the mirror, his eyes cold. As they drove, Emily noticed they weren't heading toward Harper. The road twisted away from the direction they'd come, leading deeper into the fields. She nudged Sarah, whispering, "This isn't right." Sarah's eyes widened. She turned to the driver. "Aren't we going to Harper?" The driver didn't answer. The man beside him, bigger with a thick beard, laughed softly. "Change of plans," he said. Panic surged through Emily. She reached for the door handle, but it was locked. Sarah's hand found hers, squeezing tight. The men in the back shifted closer, their bodies blocking any chance of escape. The driver slowed the van, pulling onto a dirt road that led into a stand of trees. Emily's mind raced. She thought of every horror movie she'd ever seen, every warning her parents had given her. She tried to remember if she'd told anyone where they were going, if anyone would come looking for them. The van stopped in a clearing, the engine idling. The men turned to face the girls, their expressions hard. "What do you want?" Emily demanded, her voice shaking. The bearded man grinned. "Just a little fun," he said. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Please," she whispered. "Just let us go." For a moment, no one spoke. Then the driver turned to the other men. "We don't need this kind of trouble," he said. "Let's just take them back." The bearded man scowled. "Why? They'll go to the cops." The driver shook his head. "We let them go. They'll be too scared to say anything. Besides, it's not worth it." The men argued, their voices low and tense. Emily and Sarah sat frozen, too afraid to move. Finally, the driver turned to them, his face unreadable. "Get out," he said. Emily and Sarah scrambled out of the van, stumbling on shaky legs. The driver pointed down the road. "Town's that way. Don't look back." They ran, not daring to glance over their shoulders. The van's engine roared to life, and they heard it speed away, the sound fading into the distance. They ran until their lungs burned, until the lights of Harper appeared on the horizon. They stumbled into the gas station, breathless and shaking, and begged the attendant to call the police. The police took their statement, but the van was long gone. The girl's car was still where they'd left it, untouched. They never saw the men again. The experience changed them. Emily became cautious, wary of strangers. Sarah struggled with nightmares, waking in the night to the sound of engines and the smell of cigarettes. They stayed friends, but the easy laughter of their road trip was gone, replaced by a shared understanding of how quickly the world could turn dangerous. Years later, Emily would find herself driving alone late at night, headlights cutting through the darkness. Every time she saw a van in her mirror, her heart would race, her hands tightening on the wheel. She never forgot the lesson she'd learned on that lonely road. Sometimes, the most terrifying monsters are the ones who look just like everyone else. If you've ever accepted help from a stranger, If you've ever trusted someone because you had no other choice, you know how quickly kindness can turn to fear. The open road is a place of freedom, but it's also a place where danger can hide in plain sight. So the next time you find yourself stranded, remember Emily and Sarah. Trust your instincts, stay alert, and never, ever get into a car with someone who makes you uneasy. If you have a story like this, if you've ever been offered a ride that didn't feel right or escaped a situation that could have ended badly, share it in the comments below. Your experience might be the warning someone else needs to stay safe. And don't forget to subscribe to Verified Fear's Horror Stories channel for more true tales that will keep you looking over your shoulder. Stay safe out there. And remember, sometimes the scariest dangers are the ones that come with a smile. Let's continue with our fourth story, one that blurs the line between reality and the supernatural, and will make you question what really haunts the open road. For as long as she could remember, Rachel had loved road trips. She was the kind of person who found comfort in the hum of the engine, the endless ribbon of highway, and the way the world seemed to open up when you left the city behind. Her boyfriend, Tyler, was more of a homebody, but he loved Rachel enough to indulge her wanderlust. That's how they found themselves driving across the lonely highways of Wyoming one chilly October night, the sky heavy with stars and the land around them swallowed by darkness. They'd spent the day hiking in Yellowstone, marveling at geysers and watching herds of bison move across the plains. By the time they left the park, the sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving them with hours of driving ahead before they'd reach their motel in Casper. Rachel insisted on taking the back roads, eager to avoid the monotony of the interstate and hoping to catch a glimpse of the wild, empty landscapes she loved so much. Tyler agreed, though he was less enthusiastic as the GPS led them onto narrower and more isolated roads, the headlights barely piercing the blackness that pressed in on all sides. The first hour passed in companionable silence. Rachel drove, her hand steady on the wheel, while Tyler dozed in the passenger seat. The only sounds were the engine, the occasional thump of the tires over a pothole, and the distant howl of the wind. Every so often, Rachel would spot the faint glow of a farmhouse or the silhouette of a barn against the night sky. But for the most part, they were alone. She felt a thrill at the isolation, the sense that they were the only people in the world. That feeling began to shift as the night wore on. The road grew rougher, the trees along the shoulder crowding closer. The temperature dropped, and a thin mist began to rise from the fields, swirling in the beams of the headlights. Rachel turned off the radio, suddenly uneasy. She couldn't say why, but the darkness felt heavier, more oppressive. Tyler stirred, rubbing his eyes and glancing at the clock. It was nearly midnight. "Are we almost there?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. "About another hour," Rachel replied, forcing a smile. "You can go back to sleep if you want." Tyler shook his head. "I'll stay up with you. Feels weird out here." Rachel nodded, relieved to have his company. She tried to shake off the sense of foreboding, telling herself it was just the lateness of the hour and the unfamiliar road. But as they rounded a bend, she saw something that made her breath catch in her throat, a pair of headlights in the distance, growing brighter as they approached. At first, Rachel felt a surge of relief. Another car meant they weren't completely alone. But as the vehicle drew closer, she realized something was off. The headlights were too high, too wide set, and they seemed to float above the road, swaying from side to side. The light was blinding, harsh and white, illuminating the mist in the strange, swirling patterns. Tyler squinted, trying to make out the shape of the vehicle. "Is that a truck?" he asked. Rachel nodded, slowing the car as the headlights bore down on them. The truck was moving fast, too fast for a road like this. She pulled as far to the right as she could, her tires crunching on the gravel shoulder. The truck didn't slow. It barreled toward them, horn blaring, lights flashing. Rachel gripped the wheel, heart pounding, as the truck swerved into their lane. "Rachel, watch out!" Tyler shouted. She slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop. For a split second, the truck filled her vision. An old rusted semi with shattered windows and a grille twisted into a snarl. The driver's face was a blur, lost in the glare of the headlights. Rachel braced for impact, certain they were about to die. But the truck passed through them, literally through them. There was no crash, no sound of metal on metal, just a sudden, bone-chilling cold that seeped into Rachel's skin and left her gasping for breath. The headlights vanished, swallowed by the darkness. The road ahead was empty. For a moment, neither Rachel nor Tyler could speak. They sat in stunned silence, the car idling in the middle of the road. Rachel's hands shook so badly she could barely keep them on the wheel. Tyler reached over, his face pale. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. Rachel shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. She tried to start the car, but the engine sputtered and died. Panic surged through her. What if the truck came back? What if they were stranded here, alone in the dark? Tyler tried to reassure her, but his voice trembled. He got out to check under the hood, but everything looked normal. After a few minutes, the car started again, the engine coughing to life. Rachel pulled back onto the road, driving slowly, her eyes darting to the mirrors every few seconds. The rest of the drive passed in a blur. They reached their motel just before dawn, exhausted and shaken. Neither of them slept. They tried to make sense of what had happened, but the memory of the truck, the way it had appeared out of nowhere, the way it had passed through them without a sound, defied explanation. The next day, they asked around at a local diner, describing what they'd seen. The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes, listened quietly before nodding. "You saw the ghost truck," she said. "Happens every few years, always on that stretch of road. My cousin saw it once. Said it nearly ran him off the road. Some folks say it's a spirit of a trucker who died out there years ago. Others say it's just a trick of the light. But you're not the first, and you won't be the last." Rachel and Tyler left the diner in silence, the waitress's words echoing in their minds. They finished their trip, but the joy was gone, replaced by a lingering sense of dread. Rachel never took back roads again, never drove at night unless she had to. Tyler tried to laugh it off, but Rachel could see the fear in his eyes whenever they passed a truck on the highway. Years went by, but the memory never faded. Sometimes, Rachel would wake in the middle of the night, heart racing, certain she could hear the blare of a horn and the roar of an engine. She'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the ghost truck was still out there, waiting for its next victim. She read everything she could find about the legend. Stories of drivers who'd seen the truck, who'd felt the same bone-deep cold, who'd been left stranded on the side of the road with engines that wouldn't start. Some said the truck was a warning, a harbinger of death. Others claimed it was the restless spirit of a man wronged, doomed to drive the same stretch of highway for eternity. Rachel never found an answer. She moved to the city, started a family, tried to put the past behind her. But every so often, she'd find herself behind the wheel late at night, the road stretching out ahead, the darkness pressing in. And she'd remember the ghost truck, the way it had appeared out of nowhere, the way it had passed through her like a shadow, leaving nothing but fear in its wake. If you've ever driven a lonely road at night, if you've ever felt the hair on the back of your neck stand up for no reason, you know how quickly the familiar can turn strange. The open road is a place of freedom, but it's also a place where the past lingers, where the dead refuse to rest. So the next time you see headlights in your mirror, remember Rachel and Tyler. Remember that not everything on the road is what it seems. And if you ever find yourself face to face with a ghost truck, pray that it lets you pass. If you have a story like this, if you've ever encountered something on the road you can't explain, share it in the comments below. Your experience might be the warning someone else needs to stay safe. And don't forget to subscribe to Verified Fear's Horror Stories channel for more true tales that will keep you looking over your shoulder. Stay safe out there. And remember, sometimes the scariest things are the ones you can't see coming. Let's move on to our fifth story. A true account that will make you question not only the strangers you meet on the road, but the very people sworn to protect you. For most of her life, Jess had trusted the world. She'd grown up in a small town in Indiana, where everyone knew everyone, where the police were neighbors and friends, and where the worst thing that ever happened was a fender bender or a lost dog. She was 22 the summer she and her three closest friends, Maya, Lila, and Hannah, decided to take a road trip before the responsibilities of adulthood swallowed them whole. They'd just graduated college, and the future felt like a wide-open highway. Their plan was to drive from their hometown to Chicago, then down through the heartland to St. Louis, Memphis, and finally New Orleans. It was a rite of passage, a last adventure before real life began. The first leg of the trip was filled with laughter and music, the car packed with snacks and the kind of inside jokes that only lifelong friends share. They took turns driving, stopping at quirky roadside attractions and cheap motels, documenting every moment for their Instagram feeds. They felt invincible, untouchable, as if nothing bad could ever happen to them. It was on the second night, somewhere in southern Illinois, that things began to unravel. They'd left Chicago late, caught in a tangle of traffic and summer storms, and by the time they reached the rural highways, it was well past midnight. The world outside the car was a blur of cornfields and darkness, the only light coming from the headlights and the occasional flicker of lightning on the horizon. Jess was driving, her eyes gritty with exhaustion, when she saw the red and blue lights in the rearview mirror. Relief washed over her. She'd been fighting to stay awake, and the sight of a police car felt like a sign that they were still tethered to civilization. She slowed and pulled onto the shoulder, rolling down her window as the cruiser stopped behind them. The officer approached slowly, flashlight in hand. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that was hard to read in the shifting shadows. His uniform was crisp, his badge gleaming in the light. "Evening, ladies," he said, his voice calm but authoritative. "Where are you headed?" Jess explained about their road trip, her voice trembling slightly from nerves. The officer nodded, shining his light into the car, pausing on each of their faces. There was something in his eyes that made Jess uneasy, a flatness, a lack of warmth. "I need you to step out of the car," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The girls exchanged nervous glances, but did as they were told. The officer lined them up on the shoulder asking for their IDs. He studied each one carefully, then handed them back. "You girls shouldn't be out here this late," he said. "These roads can be dangerous. There's been some trouble in the area, break-ins, assaults. I'm going to escort you to a safer place." Jess felt a flicker of relief. Maybe he was just being cautious, looking out for them. But as the officer got back in his cruiser and gestured for them to follow, a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. They drove for miles, the police car leading the way, its lights flashing in the darkness. The road grew narrower, the cornfields pressing in on either side. Jess lost track of where they were. The GPS had stopped working, and there were no street signs, no houses, nothing but endless rows of corn. Finally, the cruiser turned onto a dirt road, barely wide enough for the car. Jess hesitated, but the officer flashed his lights again, urging her forward. She followed, heart pounding, as the road wound deeper into the fields. They came to a clearing, where a dilapidated barn stood silhouetted against the sky. The officer got out, motioning for them to park. Jess's hands shook as she turned off the engine. The girls sat in silence, fear thick in the air. The officer approached, his face unreadable. "I need to check your car," he said. "There have been reports of stolen property in the area." Jess nodded, too afraid to argue. The officer circled the car, shining his flashlight into the windows. Suddenly, another set of headlights appeared, bouncing down the dirt road. A pickup truck pulled into the clearing, and two men got out, shotguns slung over their shoulders. Panic surged through Jess. She glanced at her friends, their faces pale with terror. The officer spoke quietly with the men, then turned back to the girls. "I need one of you to come with me," he said, his eyes settling on Maya. Maya shook her head, backing away. "Why? What did we do?" "It's just a few questions," the officer said, his tone hardening. "You'll be safe." Jess stepped forward, her voice shaking. "We want to stay together." The officer's expression darkened. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." The men with the shotguns moved closer, their faces hidden in shadow. Jess's mind raced. This wasn't right. None of it was right. She remembered every warning her parents had ever given her, every story she'd dismissed as paranoia. She grabbed Maya's hand, pulling her back. "We're not going anywhere," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. The officer's jaw tightened. For a moment, Jess thought he might force the issue. But then he glanced at the men, and something passed between them. A silent conversation. The officer sighed, stepping back. "Fine," he said. "Get in your car and go. But if I see you out here again, there will be consequences." Jess didn't wait for him to change his mind. She shoved her friends into the car, fumbling with the keys. The engine roared to life, and she tore out of the clearing, gravel spraying behind them. In the rearview mirror, she saw the men watching them go, their faces blank and cold. They drove for miles, not daring to stop, not daring to speak. When they finally reached a main road, Jess pulled over, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the wheel. The girls huddled together, crying and shaking, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away. They called the police, but the dispatcher seemed skeptical. "Are you sure it was a real officer?" she asked. "There haven't been any patrols in that area tonight." Jess's blood ran cold. She described the cruiser, the badge, the men with the shotguns. The dispatcher promised to send someone to check it out, but Jess could tell she didn't believe them. They spent the rest of the night in a brightly lit gas station, too afraid to sleep. In the morning, they tried to retrace their route, but the dirt road was gone, swallowed by the cornfields. There was no sign of the barn, no tire tracks, nothing to prove what had happened. The experience changed them. Jess became wary, mistrustful of authority. Maya struggled with nightmares, waking in the night to the sound of footsteps outside her window. Lila and Hannah withdrew, their friendship strained by the trauma they'd shared. They never found out who the officer was or what he and the men had planned. The police dismissed their story, chalking it up to stress and exhaustion. But Jess knew what she'd seen. The coldness in the officer's eyes, the threat in his voice, the sense that they'd come within inches of something truly evil. Years later, Jess still avoided rural roads, still flinched at the sight of flashing lights in her mirror. She told her story to anyone who would listen, warning them to trust their instincts, to never follow a stranger, no matter what uniform they wore. If you've ever felt the prickling sensation that something isn't right, if you've ever questioned the motives of someone in authority, you know how quickly trust can turn to fear. The open road is a place of freedom, but it's also a place where danger can wear any face, even the face of the law. So the next time you're pulled over on a lonely road, remember Jess and her friends. Stay together, stay alert, and never, ever let your guard down. If you have a story like this, if you've ever been threatened by someone you thought you could trust, share it in the comments below. Your experience might be the warning someone else needs to stay safe. And don't forget to subscribe to Verified Fear's Horror Stories channel for more true tales that will keep you looking over your shoulder. Stay safe out there. And remember, sometimes the scariest dangers are the ones that wear a badge. Let's continue with our sixth story. A true account that will make you question what really lingers on the roads we build over the past. For decades, the small town of Millersfield was defined by its isolation. Tucked between rolling hills and dense woods, its only connection to the outside world was a winding, two-lane road that snaked through the countryside. The road was notorious for its sharp bends, steep drop-offs, and the way it seemed to disappear into fog on humid summer nights. Locals called it Old Millersfield Road, and everyone knew someone who'd lost control on its curves. For years, the town council lobbied for a safer, straighter bypass, a modern highway that would skirt the town and make travel easier for everyone. When the bypass finally opened, it was hailed as a triumph of progress. The new road cut straight through the hills, bypassing the old mines and abandoned farmsteads that dotted the landscape. It was wide, well-lit, and smooth as glass. The first week, traffic was heavy with curious locals eager to try out the new route. But almost immediately, the stories began. It started with a trucker named Dave, who was hauling a load of lumber late one night. He was the first to report seeing something strange, a group of children, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, standing by the side of the road. Dave slowed, thinking they might be lost or in trouble. But as he drew closer, the children vanished, dissolving into thin air. He told himself it was just fatigue, a trick of the headlights on the mist. But the image haunted him for days. A week later, a young woman named Carla was driving home from her shift at the hospital. She was tired, her mind drifting, when she saw a figure step into the road ahead. She slammed on the brakes, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. She sat for a moment, shaking, before continuing on. The next morning, She found a tiny, muddy handprint on her windshield. The stories multiplied. Drivers reported seeing children playing in the median, their laughter echoing in the night. Others swore they'd seen a monk in a tattered brown robe, standing motionless at the edge of the woods, his face hidden in shadow. Some said they'd glimpsed women in long dresses, men in miners' caps, entire families walking hand in hand along the shoulder. The details varied, but the fear was always the same, a sudden, inexplicable sense of dread, as if the past was bleeding through into the present. At first, the town dismissed the stories as superstition. But then, the accidents began. Cars swerved to avoid phantom children, trucks jackknifed on dry pavement, drivers lost control for no reason at all. The bypass developed a reputation as a bad road, a place where strange things happened and people died for no reason. The police investigated, but found nothing. No evidence, no footprints, no explanation. The town historian, Mrs. Abernathy, was the first to suggest a connection to the old mines. She explained that the bypass had been built directly over the remains of the Millersfield mine, where dozens of children had died in a collapse more than a century ago. The mine had been sealed and forgotten, but the memory lingered in the town's collective consciousness. Mrs. Abernathy believed the spirits of the children were trapped beneath the road, reaching out to the living for help. Skeptics scoffed, but the stories persisted. One night, a group of teenagers dared each other to walk the bypass at midnight. They laughed and joked, filming themselves for social media. But as they reached the midpoint, the laughter died. The air grew cold, and a thick fog rolled in, swallowing the road. The teens heard voices, soft, pleading, calling their names. One girl felt a small, icy hand slip into hers. She screamed, dropping her phone. When they ran back to their car, they found muddy footprints leading up to the doors. The video went viral, drawing ghost hunters and thrill seekers from miles around. Some claimed to capture voices on tape or orbs of light floating above the pavement. Others left in terror, swearing never to return. The town tried to downplay the stories, worried about the impact on tourism. But the legend only grew. For the people who lived in Millersfield, the bypass became a source of anxiety. Parents warned their children not to walk near the road after dark. Truckers avoided it whenever possible, preferring the old, winding route despite its dangers. The police increased patrols, but the accidents continued. One night, a local teacher named Mr. Reynolds was driving home after a late meeting. He was a practical man, not given to flights of fancy. But as he approached the bypass, he felt a sudden chill. The radio crackled with static, and the headlights flickered. In the rearview mirror, he saw a group of children sitting in the back seat, their eyes wide and sad. He slammed on the brakes, heart racing, but when he turned, the car was empty. He drove home in a daze, unable to shake the feeling that he'd been given a warning. He told his wife, who insisted he see a doctor. But Mr. Reynolds knew what he'd seen. He began researching the mine disaster, uncovering old newspaper articles and faded photographs. He learned that the children who died had never been properly memorialized, their graves unmarked, their names forgotten. He wondered if that was why their spirits lingered, trapped between worlds. Driven by guilt and a sense of responsibility, Mr. Reynolds organized a memorial service at the site of the old mine. He invited the entire town, and together they placed flowers and lit candles, reading aloud the names of the children who had died. That night, for the first time in months, there were no accidents on the bypass. The air felt lighter, the road less oppressive, But the peace was short-lived. A few weeks later, the sightings resumed. Drivers reported seeing the monk again, standing at the edge of the woods, his face hidden beneath his hood. Some said he was a guardian, watching over the spirits of the children. Others believed he was a harbinger, a warning that the road would never be safe. The town council debated closing the bypass, but the state refused. Too much money had been invested, and the old road was too dangerous to reopen. Instead, they installed more lights, added warning signs, and urged drivers to be cautious. But the fear remained. For those who had seen the ghosts, the experience was life-changing. Carla, the nurse, became obsessed with the idea of helping the spirits find peace. She visited the site every week, leaving toys and flowers, whispering prayers into the wind. Dave, the trucker, refused to drive at night, haunted by the memory of the children's faces. The teenagers who had filmed the viral video struggled with nightmares, waking in the night to the sound of laughter and the feeling of small hands tugging at their sheets. The legend of the haunted bypass became part of Millersfield's identity, a story passed down from one generation to the next. Some treated it as a joke, a way to scare newcomers and entertain tourists. Others believed it was a warning, a reminder that the past is never truly buried, that the land remembers what we try to forget. As the years passed, the accidents continued. Some blamed the design of the road, others blamed the weather. But those who had seen the ghosts knew the truth. The spirits of the children, the monk, the families who had lost everything in the mines. They were still there, trapped beneath the asphalt, reaching out to the living for help. If you ever find yourself driving the Millersfield bypass late at night, pay attention to the shadows at the edge of your headlights. Listen for the sound of laughter, the whisper of voices in the wind. And if you see a child standing by the side of the road, don't stop. Don't look back. Just drive and pray that the past lets you pass in peace. If you have a story like this, if you've ever encountered something on the road that you can't explain, share it in the comments below. Your experience might be the warning someone else needs to stay safe. And don't forget to subscribe to Verified Fear's Horror Stories channel for more true tales that will keep you looking over your shoulder. Stay safe out there, and remember, sometimes the scariest things are the ones we build over the bones of the past. If you would like this story expanded with even more psychological depth, dialogue, or additional perspectives, just let me know, and I can continue to build on this foundation to reach your exact word count and style preferences. Let's continue with our 7th story. A true account that will make you question the very nature of trust and the terrifying reality of being completely at someone else's mercy on the open road. For as long as she could remember, Olivia had been fiercely independent. She was the kind of person who thrived on adventure, who relished the freedom of solo travel, and who believed that the world, for all its dangers, was mostly good. She'd driven cross-country twice before, each time finding new friends, new stories, and new corners of America to fall in love with. It was the summer after her college graduation, and she decided to take one last road trip before settling into her first real job. A journey from her childhood home in Vermont all the way to San Diego, where her new life awaited. Her parents worried, of course, but Olivia reassured them with her usual confidence. She had a reliable car, a carefully planned route, and a phone loaded with emergency contacts. She promised to check in every night and avoid picking up strangers. And with a hug and a wave, she set out into the sunrise. feeling the familiar thrill of the unknown ahead. The first days were everything she'd hoped for. She wound through the lush hills of New England, stopped for lobster rolls in Connecticut, and watched the skyline of New York City recede in her rearview mirror. She camped in state parks, spent a night in a quirky bed and breakfast in Ohio, and marveled at the endless fields of the Midwest. She took photos at every stop, sending them to her parents and friends, her confidence growing with every mile. By the time she reached the plains of Kansas, the road felt like home, and the worries her parents had pressed on her seemed distant and unnecessary. It was somewhere between Salina and Dodge City that things began to unravel. Olivia had been driving for hours, lulled by the monotony of the highway and the gentle sway of the car. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and she was looking forward to a hot meal and a soft bed in the next town. She passed a sign for a rest area 10 miles ahead and decided to push on, her stomach rumbling with anticipation. The road was empty, the fields on either side stretching out to the horizon, and for the first time all trip, Olivia felt a flicker of unease. She brushed it off as fatigue cranked up the radio and pressed on. As she neared the rest area, Olivia noticed a car pulled over on the shoulder, hazard lights flashing. A man stood beside it, waving his arms, his face etched with worry. Olivia hesitated, her parents' warnings echoing in her mind. But the man looked desperate, and she couldn't ignore the pang of empathy that rose in her chest. She slowed, rolling down her window as she pulled up beside him. "Are you okay?" she called, keeping her distance. The man, mid-30s, clean-shaven, dressed in jeans and a faded t-shirt, explained that his car had broken down and his phone was dead. He asked if she could give him a ride to the next town, just a few miles up the highway. Olivia hesitated, glancing at the empty road behind her. The man seemed harmless enough, and she didn't want to leave him stranded. Against her better judgment, she agreed, unlocking the passenger door and gesturing for him to get in. He thanked her profusely, introducing himself as Tom. He was friendly, chatty, and seemed genuinely grateful for the help. Olivia relaxed as they drove, listening to his stories about growing up in Kansas and his plans to visit family in Colorado. They reached the rest area, and Tom asked if she could wait while he used the restroom. Olivia agreed, pulling into a parking spot and checking her phone for messages. A few minutes later, Tom returned, but something in his demeanor had changed. He was quieter, his eyes darting nervously around the lot. Olivia felt a twinge of unease, but before she could react, Tom lunged, grabbing her by the arm and dragging her from the car. She screamed, kicking and clawing, but Tom was stronger. He forced her into the trunk of his car, slamming the lid shut before she could escape. Panic surged through Olivia as she pounded on the inside of the trunk, her screams muffled by the thick metal. She fumbled for her phone, but it was still in the front seat of her car. The trunk was dark, hot, and smelled of oil and old carpet. She tried to remember everything she'd ever read about escaping from a trunk: look for the emergency release, kick out the tail lights, stay calm. Her heart raced as she felt around in the darkness, her fingers brushing against a rusted tire iron and a tangled mess of jumper cables. There was no emergency release. The car started, the engine rumbling beneath her. Olivia felt the vehicle lurch forward, the motion disorienting. She tried to keep track of the turns, the stops, the sounds outside, but fear clouded her mind. She sobbed, her body shaking with terror, as the car sped down the highway, away from the safety of the rest area and into the unknown. Time lost all meaning in the darkness. Olivia drifted in and out of consciousness, her mind replaying every mistake, every warning she'd ignored. She thought of her parents, her friends, the life she'd been so eager to start. She wondered if anyone would notice she was missing, if anyone would come looking for her. She tried to stay focused, to remember every detail that might help her escape, but the fear was overwhelming. Eventually, the car slowed, then stopped. Olivia heard voices outside, Tom and another man, their words muffled by the trunk. She strained to listen, catching snippets of conversation. "She's in the trunk. No one saw. We'll take her to the old place." Her blood ran cold as she realized she wasn't just dealing with one captor, but two. The trunk opened, and the harsh glare of a flashlight blinded her. Tom and the other man, a burly, bearded figure with cold eyes, dragged her from the trunk, binding her hands with duct tape. They forced her into the back seat, wedged between them, and drove for what felt like hours. Olivia tried to memorize the route, but the roads twisted and turned, the landmarks unfamiliar. They stopped at an abandoned farmhouse, its windows boarded up and its yard overgrown with weeds. The men dragged her inside, locking her in a small, windowless room. Olivia's mind raced as she searched for a way out, testing the door, the walls, the floorboards. She found nothing but splinters and dust. Days passed in a blur of fear and exhaustion. The men brought her food and water, but said little. She heard them arguing outside her door, their voices rising and falling. She caught fragments of their plans: ransom, escape, something about waiting for the right time. Olivia clung to hope, telling herself that someone would come looking for her, that she would find a way out. One night, as the men argued in the kitchen, Olivia heard a faint scraping sound from the wall behind her. She pressed her ear to the plaster, listening. The sound grew louder, then stopped. A whisper, barely audible, filtered through the wall. "Are you okay?" Olivia's heart leapt. She whispered back, explaining her situation. The voice, soft, trembling, belonged to another captive, a teenage girl named Mia. She'd been taken weeks earlier, snatched from a bus stop in a nearby town. The men had kept her locked up, feeding her just enough to keep her alive. Mia had given up hope of rescue, but Olivia's arrival had rekindled a spark of determination. Together, they plotted their escape. Olivia found a loose floorboard, prying it up with a shard of broken glass. Beneath it, she discovered a rusted nail, which she used to pick at the lock on her door. It took days of careful work, but finally, the lock gave way. Olivia waited until the men were asleep, then crept into Mia's room, freeing her from her bonds. They moved silently through the house, hearts pounding, every creak of the floorboards threatening to give them away. They found a phone in the kitchen, but it was dead. The front door was locked, the windows barred. Desperate, they searched for another way out, finally discovering a cellar door that led to the backyard. They slipped into the night, running through the overgrown yard and into the woods beyond. They stumbled through the darkness, branches tearing at their clothes, until they reached a road. Olivia flagged down a passing car, her voice hoarse with relief. The police arrived within minutes, arresting Tom and his accomplice. Olivia and Mia were taken to the hospital, where they were reunited with their families. The ordeal had lasted less than a week, but it felt like a lifetime. The experience changed Olivia forever. She became cautious, wary of strangers, haunted by nightmares of the trunk and the darkness. She struggled with guilt. Why had she stopped? Why hadn't she listened to her instincts? But she also found strength in her survival. in the bond she'd formed with Mia, in the knowledge that she'd fought back and escaped. Olivia told her story to anyone who would listen, warning others to trust their instincts, to be careful on the road, to never take safety for granted. She became an advocate for missing persons, working to help others who had been taken, lost, or forgotten. If you've ever trusted a stranger, if you've ever ignored that flicker of unease, you know how quickly the world can turn dangerous. The open road is a place of freedom, but it's also a place where evil can hide in plain sight. So the next time you see someone stranded on the side of the road, remember Olivia. Trust your instincts, stay alert, and never, ever let your guard down. If you have a story like this, if you've ever escaped a situation that could have ended badly, share it in the comments below. Your experience might be the warning someone else needs to stay safe. And don't forget to subscribe to Verified Fear's Horror Stories channel for more true tales that will keep you looking over your shoulder. Let's continue with our 8th story, a true account that will make you realize that sometimes the most terrifying dangers on the road aren't supernatural or human, but mechanical. And that fear can grow from the slow, relentless awareness that your life depends on a machine that's failing you when you're most alone. For as long as he could remember, Adam had loved driving. He loved the feeling of control, the way the world blurred past his windows, the sense of possibility that came with every new stretch of highway. He was the kind of person who volunteered to drive on every road trip, who kept his car spotless and well-maintained, who took pride in knowing the sound of every rattle and hum under the hood. He'd driven through snowstorms in Alberta, across the endless prairies of Saskatchewan, and up the winding mountain roads of British Columbia. He thought he understood the risks of the road: bad weather, reckless drivers, the occasional close call with wildlife. But nothing had prepared him for the night he found himself stranded between Sparwood and Longview, with a car that was dying beneath him and no one for miles in any direction. It started as a routine trip. Adam had been visiting his sister in Fernie, and after a long weekend of hiking and catching up, he set out for home late on a Sunday afternoon. The sky was overcast, the air heavy with the threat of rain. But Adam wasn't worried. He knew the route well, a winding stretch of highway that cut through the foothills, dotted with small towns and the occasional gas station. He filled up his tank, checked his oil, and set off with his favorite playlist humming through the speakers. The first hour passed without incident. The road was empty, the scenery beautiful, and Adam felt the familiar peace that came with being alone behind the wheel. But as dusk settled over the hills, Adam noticed something strange. The engine, usually smooth and responsive, began to stutter. At first, it was just a slight hesitation when he pressed the accelerator, a momentary lag that he chalked up to bad gas or a dirty filter. But as the miles ticked by, the problem grew worse. The car began to lose power on the hills, the engine coughing and sputtering as if it were struggling to breathe. Adam frowned, glancing at the dashboard. No warning lights, no obvious signs of trouble. He turned off the music, listening intently to the sounds coming from under the hood. The stuttering grew more pronounced, the car jerking and shuddering with every mile. Adam's heart began to race. He was miles from the nearest town with no cell service and no one to call for help. He pulled over, popped the hood, and peered into the engine bay, hoping for an obvious solution. Everything looked normal, no smoke, no leaks, nothing out of place. He checked the oil again, tightened the gas cap, and tried to start the car. The engine turned over reluctantly, then caught. But the idle was rough, the whole vehicle vibrating with a sickly rhythm. Adam got back on the road, driving slowly, hyper-aware of every sound and vibration. He kept the revs high, afraid that letting the engine drop below 2,000 RPM would cause it to stall. The road ahead stretched out in a lonely ribbon, the trees pressing in on either side, the sky growing darker by the minute. Every time he crested a hill, he prayed for the lights of a town, a gas station, any sign of civilization. But the road remained empty, the only company the occasional deer staring from the shadows. The fear grew slowly, a cold knot in Adam's stomach. He knew that if the car died out here, he'd be in real trouble. The temperature was dropping, and the forecast called for rain. He had no cell service, no way to call for help, and the nearest town was at least 50 kilometers away. He tried to stay calm, focusing on the road, willing the car to keep going. He talked to the engine, coaxing it along, promising to get it fixed, to treat it better, to never take it for granted again. As the night deepened, the situation grew more desperate. The engine was barely running, the car lurching and groaning with every mile. Adam's hands were white-knuckled on the wheel, his eyes darting between the road and the dashboard, watching the temperature gauge, the oil pressure, the fuel level. He turned off everything he could, the radio, the air conditioning, even the headlights when he was sure no one else was around, trying to conserve every bit of power. The rain started as a drizzle, then grew into a steady downpour. The wipers struggled to keep up, smearing water across the windshield. The road became slick, the visibility poor. Adam slowed to a crawl, terrified that any sudden movement would kill the engine for good. He passed a sign. Longview, 60 kilometers. It might as well have been 100. He gritted his teeth, focusing on the white lines, on the rhythm of the engine, on the hope that he could make it just a little farther. The hours dragged on. Adam lost all sense of time, his world shrinking to the circle of light cast by his headlights and the relentless sound of the rain. He began to hallucinate, seeing shapes in the shadows, faces in the trees. He imagined the car dying, imagined himself walking for miles in the dark, soaked to the bone, lost in the wilderness. He thought of the stories he'd heard, people who vanished on lonely roads, who were found days later, frozen or worse. He tried to push the thoughts away, focusing on the task at hand, but the fear was always there, gnawing at the edges of his mind. At one point, the engine sputtered so badly that Adam was sure it was over. The car slowed to a crawl, the lights dimming, the dashboard flickering. He pulled over, heart pounding, and sat in the dark, listening to the rain drum on the roof. He thought about getting out, about trying to flag down a passing car, but he knew the chances were slim. He was alone, utterly alone, and the realization was like a punch to the gut. He tried the ignition again, whispering a prayer. The engine coughed, then caught, running rough but running. Adam forced himself back onto the road, driving even more slowly, every nerve on edge. He counted the kilometers, marking each one as a small victory. 50 to go, 40, 30. The rain never let up, the darkness never lifted. As he neared Longview, Adam's relief was tempered by exhaustion and fear. He was running on adrenaline, his body shaking, his mind numb. The car was making a terrible grinding noise now, the engine rattling with every turn of the wheels. He could smell burning oil, feel the heat rising from the floorboards. He knew he was pushing the car beyond its limits, but he had no choice. Finally, After what felt like an eternity, Adam saw the lights of Longview shimmering through the rain. He let out a sob of relief, barely able to believe he'd made it. He coasted into the first gas station he saw, the engine dying with a final, shuddering gasp. He sat in the car for a long time, head resting on the steering wheel, tears streaming down his face. The attendant came out, tapping on the window. Adam rolled it down, his voice shaking as he explained what had happened. The attendant listened, nodding sympathetically, then called a tow truck. Adam watched as his car was loaded onto the flatbed, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and grief. He'd survived, but the experience had changed him. He checked into a motel, collapsing onto the bed, unable to sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the empty road, heard the sound of the engine dying, felt the cold knot of fear in his stomach. He called his sister, his parents, letting them know he was safe. But he couldn't bring himself to tell them how close he'd come to disaster. The next day, the mechanic confirmed what Adam had suspected. The engine was shot, a catastrophic failure that could have left him stranded in the middle of nowhere. He sold the car for scrap, taking the bus the rest of the way home. He never drove that stretch of road again. The experience haunted Adam for years. He became hyper-vigilant about car maintenance, never letting the gas tank drop below half, never ignoring a strange sound or vibration. He developed a fear of driving at night, of being alone on the road, of the slow, creeping dread that comes when you realize your fate is in the hands of a machine that doesn't care if you live or die. He told his story to anyone who would listen, warning them to take care of their cars, to respect the dangers of the road, to never take safety for granted. He knew that most people would never understand the terror of that night, the way the fear grew with every mile, the way the darkness seemed to press in, suffocating and absolute. If you've ever been stranded on a lonely road, if you've ever felt the cold knot of fear in your stomach as your car sputters and dies, you know how quickly confidence can turn to panic. The open road is a place of freedom, but it's also a place where you're utterly alone, where help is miles away, where the only thing standing between you and disaster is a machine that can fail at any moment. So the next time you set out on a long drive, remember Adam. Check your car, plan your route, and never underestimate the dangers of the road. Because sometimes, the scariest monsters aren't the ones you can see. They're the ones hiding under the hood, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. If you have a story like this, if you've ever survived a mechanical nightmare on the road, share it in the comments below. Your experience might be the warning someone else needs to stay safe. And don't forget to subscribe to Verified Fear's Horror Stories channel for more true tales that will keep you looking over your shoulder. Stay safe out there. And remember, sometimes the most terrifying dangers are the ones you never see coming. Let's continue with our 9th story. A true account that will make you realize that sometimes the most terrifying dangers on the road are not human or supernatural, but the unstoppable force of nature itself, and how quickly a family road trip can turn into a desperate fight for survival. For the Miller family, road trips were a summer tradition. Every year, as soon as school let out, they would load up their old Chevy Suburban with sleeping bags, fishing poles, and enough snacks to feed an army, and set off across the Midwest in search of adventure. For the kids, 15-year-old Jenna, 12-year-old Max, and 8-year-old Sophie, it was the highlight of the year, a chance to escape the routines of home and lose themselves in the endless possibilities of the open road. Their parents, Tom and Linda, cherished these trips too, seeing them as a way to reconnect as a family and create memories that would last a lifetime. The summer of 2007 was no different. The plan was to drive from their home in Topeka, Kansas, to a remote lake in Oklahoma, where Tom's brother owned a rustic cabin. The route would take them through the heart of Tornado Alley. But Tom wasn't worried. He'd grown up in the Midwest, and he prided himself on his ability to read the weather and keep his family safe. They set out on a bright June morning, the sky a perfect blue, the fields shimmering with new wheat. The kids played games in the back seat. Linda read aloud from a battered guidebook, and Tom kept one eye on the horizon, scanning for storm clouds out of habit. The first day passed in a blur of small towns, roadside diners, and endless stretches of highway. They stopped for ice cream in Wichita, took photos at the world's largest ball of twine, and arrived at the cabin just as the sun was setting. The lake was calm, the air thick with the scent of pine and wildflowers. They spent the next 2 days fishing, swimming, and exploring the woods, their laughter echoing across the water. At night, they sat around the fire, roasting marshmallows and telling ghost stories, the darkness outside their circle of light deep and impenetrable. On the third day, the weather changed. The air grew heavy, the sky turning a strange, sickly green that Tom recognized all too well. He checked the radio, listening to the forecast. Severe thunderstorms, possible tornadoes, moving in from the west. Linda suggested they pack up and head home early, but Tom hesitated. The storms were still hours away, and he didn't want to cut the trip short. Besides, he reasoned, they could always pull over if things got bad. By late afternoon, the clouds had thickened, piling up on the horizon like bruised mountains. The wind picked up, rattling the windows of the cabin and sending ripples across the lake. Tom decided it was time to go. They packed in a hurry, tossing their gear into the Suburban and double-checking the weather one last time. The radio warned of a tornado watch for the entire region, but Tom was confident they could outrun the storm if they left immediately. They set out, the mood in the car tense but hopeful. Tom kept the radio tuned to the weather station, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Linda tried to keep the kids calm, distracting them with stories and games. But even Jenna and Max could sense the anxiety in their parents' voices. The sky darkened, the clouds swirling overhead, and the first drops of rain began to fall. As they crossed into northern Oklahoma, the storm hit. The rain came in sheets, blinding and relentless, the wind howling like a living thing. Tom slowed to a crawl, the wipers useless against the deluge. Lightning flashed, illuminating the fields in stark, unnatural light. The radio crackled with static, the voice of the weatherman barely audible. Tornado warning. Take cover immediately. Tom's heart pounded. He scanned the roadside for a place to pull over, but the fields were empty, the farmhouses dark and distant. The road ahead was a tunnel of rain and wind, the trees bending almost double. Suddenly, Linda shouted, "There's something up ahead!" Tom squinted through the windshield, his stomach dropping as he saw what she meant. A line of cars stopped on the highway, their hazard lights blinking in the gloom. He pulled over behind them, rolling down his window to talk to the driver in front. The man's face was pale, his voice shaking. "There's a tornado coming this way. We can't go forward. The road's blocked by downed trees. We need to find shelter." Tom looked around, his mind racing. There was no overpass, no ditch deep enough to offer protection. The only option was a small grove of trees about 50 yards from the road. He made a split-second decision. "Everyone out, now!" The family scrambled from the car, the wind nearly knocking them off their feet. Tom grabbed Sophie, Linda took Max, and Jenna held tight to her mother's hand as they ran for the trees. The rain was like needles, stinging their faces, soaking them to the bone. The roar of the wind grew louder, a freight train bearing down on them. They reached the grove, huddling together at the base of the largest tree. Tom wrapped his arms around his family, trying to shield them from the debris flying through the air. The ground shook, the air filled with the sound of splintering wood and shattering glass. Jenna screamed as a branch whipped past her head, missing her by inches. The tornado hit with a force that defied comprehension. The wind tore at them, pulling at their clothes, their hair, their very breath. The trees bent and snapped, the ground littered with branches and debris. Tom held on with everything he had, his muscles burning, his mind filled with a single thought: keep them safe. It felt like hours, but in reality, it was only minutes. The wind began to die, the roar fading to a distant rumble. The rain slackened, the air suddenly still. Tom opened his eyes, blinking against the mud and blood on his face. His family was alive, shaken but unharmed. They stumbled back to the road, the devastation laid bare in the weak light. Cars were overturned, trees uprooted, power lines downed. The Suburban was gone, swept away by the storm. Other families emerged from the wreckage, their faces pale and stunned. The hours that followed were a blur of chaos and confusion. Emergency crews arrived, picking their way through the debris, searching for survivors. The Millers were taken to a nearby shelter, where they huddled together, grateful to be alive. They learned that the tornado had been an EF4, one of the strongest in years, carving a path of destruction for miles. In the days that followed, the family struggled to process what had happened. The kids had nightmares, waking in the night to the sound of wind and rain. Tom blamed himself for not leaving sooner, for putting his family in danger. Linda tried to reassure him, but she too was haunted by the memory of the storm. They returned home, their summer trip cut short, their sense of safety shattered. The experience changed them, leaving scars both visible and invisible. They became more cautious, more aware of the power of nature, more grateful for the simple fact of being together. Jenna, once fearless, developed a deep-seated fear of storms. Max became obsessed with weather patterns, reading everything he could about tornadoes and how to survive them. Sophie, the youngest, drew pictures of the storm. Dark clouds, swirling winds, her family huddled together beneath a tree. Tom and Linda did their best to help their children heal, but they too struggled with the trauma. Tom attended support groups for survivors, sharing his story with others who had faced the same terror. Linda volunteered at the local Red Cross, helping families who had lost everything to the storm. The Millers' story became a cautionary tale in their community, a reminder of how quickly life can change, how fragile safety really is. They told their story to anyone who would listen, urging others to respect the power of nature, to never take the road for granted. If you've ever been caught in a storm on the open road, if you've ever felt the raw, primal fear of nature unleashed, you know how quickly confidence can turn to terror. The road is a place of freedom, but it's also a place where you're at the mercy of forces beyond your control. So the next time you see storm clouds gathering on the horizon, remember the Millers. Trust your instincts, seek shelter, and never, ever underestimate the power of the wind. If you have a story like this, if you've ever survived a natural disaster on the road, share it in the comments below. Your experience might be the warning someone else needs to stay safe. And don't forget to subscribe to Verified Fears Horror Stories channel for more true tales that will keep you looking over your shoulder. Stay safe out there. And remember, sometimes the most terrifying dangers are the ones you can't outrun. Let's continue with our 10th story. A true account that will make you question what you see in the lonely hours of the night, and how a single fleeting encounter on the highway can linger in your mind forever. Jack had spent most of his adult life behind the wheel of a semi, traversing the vast highways that crisscrossed the American Midwest. He was no stranger to the isolation of the open road, the endless landscapes, or the way the world seemed to shrink to the glow of his headlights during those long, solitary hauls. He had always found a certain comfort in the routine. The steady hum of the engine, the predictable rhythm of mile markers, the familiar crackle of late-night radio. He'd heard plenty of stories from fellow drivers about strange things seen on the road, phantom hitchhikers, mysterious lights, and odd figures glimpsed in the fog. But Jack was a practical man, not easily rattled by tales of the supernatural. That is, until one autumn night, when he saw something that would haunt him for years to come. It was late October, and Jack was hauling a load from Kansas City to Denver. The air was crisp, the fields on either side of the highway already stripped bare by the harvest, and the sky was clear except for a sliver of moon. Jack had left the city after sunset, hoping to make good time through the night. The highway was almost deserted, and he found himself settling into the familiar trance of night driving, sipping coffee and humming along to the radio as the miles slipped by. Around midnight, Jack approached an old overpass he'd crossed countless times before. As his headlights swept up the embankment, he saw a figure standing motionless at the railing. A woman alone, silhouetted against the night sky. She wore a long, dark coat, and her hair was loose, blowing slightly in the breeze. Jack's first reaction was concern. Was she stranded? Was she waiting for someone? He slowed as he passed beneath a bridge, glancing up to get a better look. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Her gaze steady and distant, her face pale in the moonlight. Jack felt an unexpected chill, a sense of sadness and unease that he couldn't explain. He checked his mirrors as he drove on, half expecting to see her move or wave. But she remained perfectly still, watching the road below. Jack tried to shake off the strange feeling, telling himself she was probably just a traveler waiting for a ride, or perhaps someone from a nearby farm. But as the night wore on, he couldn't get her image out of his mind. The road ahead seemed emptier than usual, the darkness pressing in on all sides. He passed another overpass about an hour later, and to his shock, he saw her again. Same coat, same posture, same distant stare. This time, Jack's heart raced. He knew it was impossible for her to have reached that spot ahead of him, especially since he hadn't seen any vehicles pass or any side roads that could have allowed her to get there first. Jack's nerves were on edge now. He kept glancing in his mirrors, scanning the side of the road, half expecting to see her appear again. He tried to focus on the drive, but every overpass became a source of dread. Sometimes they were empty, but sometimes impossibly. He would see her again, always in the same spot, always watching. The more he tried to rationalize what he was seeing, the less sense it made. He wondered if he was just exhausted, if his mind was playing tricks on him after too many hours on the road. By the time the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, Jack was shaken and exhausted. He pulled into a truck stop on the edge of a small town, his hands trembling as he poured himself a cup of coffee. He tried to talk himself out of his fear, but the image of the woman on the overpass wouldn't leave him. He asked a couple of other drivers if they'd ever seen anything strange on that stretch of highway. One of them, an older man with a weathered face, nodded slowly and said, "You saw her too, didn't you?" He explained that over the years, many drivers had reported seeing a woman on the overpasses along that route, always at night, always alone. Some believed she was connected to a story from decades ago. A local woman who had spent years waiting for someone who never returned, her story woven into the fabric of local legend. Others thought she was simply a symbol of longing or sorrow, a figure who appeared to those who were alone on the road. Jack became obsessed with finding an explanation. He searched for old newspaper articles, read through online forums, and listened to every rumor he could find among the trucking community. The stories varied, but the details were always eerily similar. A solitary woman, always on the overpass, always at night, her presence leaving drivers with a lingering sense of sadness or unease. No one could say for sure who she was or why she appeared, but the encounters always left a mark. Even after Jack finished his delivery and returned home, the memory of that night haunted him. He found himself avoiding that stretch of highway, taking longer routes just to avoid the overpasses. He became more cautious, more aware of the strange and unexplained things that could happen on the road. He told his story to other drivers, warning them to trust their instincts and to never ignore the feeling that something isn't right. If you've ever driven alone at night, if you've ever glimpsed something out of the corner of your eye that you couldn't explain, you know how quickly the familiar can turn strange. The open road is a place of freedom, but it's also a place where the past lingers, where the lonely and the lost might still be waiting for someone to notice them. So the next time you see a figure standing on an overpass, remember Jack. Trust your instincts, stay alert, and never, ever look back. If you have a story like this, if you've ever encountered something on the road you can't explain, share it in the comments below. Your experience might be the warning someone else needs to stay safe. And don't forget to subscribe to Verified Fears Horror Stories channel for more true tales that will keep you looking over your shoulder. Stay safe out there. And remember, sometimes the most haunting things on the road are the ones that are never fully understood. Let's continue with our 11th story. A true account that will make you question the very people you're supposed to trust on the road, and how a single moment of doubt can be the difference between safety and disaster. For as long as she could remember, Natalie had been the responsible one in her group of friends. She was the planner, the organizer, the one who made sure everyone had their seatbelts on and their phones charged before they left for any trip. That summer, after their college graduation, Natalie and her two best friends, Claire and Marcus, decided to take one last road trip together before life scattered them in different directions. Their plan was to drive from their home in upstate New York all the way to the Grand Canyon, taking the scenic route through the Midwest and the Rockies, camping and hiking along the way. They'd spent weeks mapping out their route, booking campsites and making playlists for every leg of the journey. It was supposed to be a celebration of their friendship, a final adventure before adulthood set in. The first week was everything they'd hoped for. They drove through rolling hills and endless cornfields, stopped at quirky roadside diners, and slept under the stars in national parks. They took turns driving, swapping stories and singing along to the radio, the miles slipping by in a blur of laughter and anticipation. By the time they reached Colorado, the road felt like home, and the worries of the future seemed far away. It was somewhere in western Colorado, on a lonely stretch of highway between two small towns, that things began to go wrong. They'd left their last campsite late in the afternoon, hoping to make it to the next town before dark. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple, and the road was empty except for the occasional pickup truck or RV. Natalie was driving, Claire was dozing in the back seat, and Marcus was fiddling with the GPS, trying to find a shortcut to save them some time. As the last light faded from the sky, Natalie noticed headlights in the rearview mirror. At first, she thought nothing of it. Just another car on the highway. But as the miles passed, the vehicle stayed behind them, never passing, never falling back. Natalie's unease grew, but she tried to shake it off. Maybe they were just headed to the same town. A few minutes later, the headlights flashed. Natalie's heart skipped a beat. The car behind them, a dark SUV, sped up and pulled alongside, matching their speed. The driver rolled down his window, gesturing for them to pull over. Natalie hesitated, unsure what to do. The SUV had no markings, no visible lights. But the driver was wearing what looked like a police uniform. Marcus leaned forward, his voice tense. "I don't like this, Nat. Why would a cop be in an unmarked car out here?" Natalie's mind raced. She'd heard stories, urban legends really, about fake cops pulling people over and robbing them, or worse. But she'd also been raised to respect authority, to do what the police told her. She slowed the car, pulling onto the shoulder, her hands shaking. The SUV stopped behind them, its headlights glaring in the mirrors. The driver got out, walking slowly toward their car. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a tactical vest and dark sunglasses, even though the sun had long since set. He carried a flashlight, which he shone into the car, blinding them. "License and registration," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. Natalie fumbled for her wallet, her hands trembling. Marcus whispered, "Ask for his badge. Real cops have to show you their badge." Natalie took a deep breath, forcing herself to sound calm. "Can I see your badge, officer?" The man's expression didn't change. "Just give me your license and registration." Something was wrong. Natalie could feel it in her gut. She glanced at Marcus, who shook his head, his eyes wide with fear. Claire sat up in the back seat, her face pale. "Officer, I'd like to call 911 to verify your identity," Natalie said, her voice shaking. The man's jaw tightened. "Step out of the car. Now." Natalie's heart pounded. She remembered something her father had told her. If you ever feel unsafe during a traffic stop, you have the right to call 911 and stay in your car with the doors locked. She grabbed her phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. The man's face twisted in anger. He pounded on the window with his flashlight. "Open the door, now!" Natalie's instinct screamed at her to run. She threw the car into drive, flooring the accelerator. The tires spun on the gravel shoulder before catching, and the car shot forward, fishtailing onto the highway. The SUV roared after them, headlights blazing. Marcus shouted directions, telling Natalie to take the next exit, to lose the SUV in the maze of back roads. Claire sobbed in the back seat, her voice barely audible over the roar of the engine. The SUV stayed close, its driver leaning on the horn, swerving dangerously behind them. Natalie's phone was still connected to 911. She shouted their location into the receiver, begging for help. The dispatcher's voice was calm, telling her to keep driving, to head for a populated area, to avoid stopping at all costs. They sped through the darkness, the SUV never more than a few car lengths behind. Natalie's hands were slick with sweat, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She took a sharp turn onto a side road, the car bouncing over potholes and gravel. The SUV followed, its headlights looming in the rearview mirror. Finally, they saw the lights of a small town ahead. Natalie aimed for the first gas station she saw, pulling into the brightly lit lot. The SUV slowed, then turned and sped away, disappearing into the night. Natalie and her friends sat in the car, shaking as the police arrived. They described the man, the SUV, the uniform. The officers listened, their faces grave. "You did the right thing," one of them said. "There have been reports of fake cops in the area. People posing as law enforcement to rob travelers. If you hadn't trusted your instincts, things could have ended very differently." The rest of the trip passed in a haze of fear and exhaustion. Natalie avoided driving at night, sticking to well-traveled roads and stopping only in busy, well-lit places. She double-checked every car that followed them, her nerves frayed by the memory of the man's face, his voice, his pounding on the window. The experience changed her. She became more cautious, more skeptical, less willing to trust authority without question. She told her story to anyone who would listen, warning them to trust their instincts, to never stop for an unmarked car, to always call 911 if they felt unsafe. Marcus and Claire struggled with nightmares, waking in the night to the sound of pounding on glass, the glare of headlights in the dark. Their friendship was tested by the trauma, but in the end, it brought them closer, bonded by the knowledge that they had survived something truly terrifying. If you've ever been pulled over on a lonely road, if you've ever felt a flicker of doubt about the person in the uniform, you know how quickly trust can turn to fear. The open road is a place of freedom, but it's also a place where danger can hide behind a badge, where the people you're supposed to trust can be the ones you need to fear the most. So the next time you see flashing lights in your mirror, remember Natalie and her friends. Trust your instincts, stay alert, and never, ever let your guard down. If you have a story like this, if you've ever been threatened by someone you thought you could trust, share it in the comments below. Your experience might be the warning someone else needs to stay safe. And don't forget to subscribe to Verified Fears Horror Stories channel for more true tales that will keep you looking over your shoulder. Stay safe out there. And remember, sometimes the scariest dangers are the ones that wear a badge. Let's conclude this collection with a story that proves sometimes the most chilling threats on the open road are the ones that are meticulously planned, waiting for you in the places you least expect. This is the true account of a solo traveler who learned in the most harrowing way how quickly a peaceful journey can turn into a desperate fight for survival. For years, Daniel had dreamed of taking the ultimate solo road trip. He was a photographer by trade, but at heart, he was a wanderer. Someone who found solace in the endless horizon, who felt most alive when the world was reduced to the hum of tires on asphalt and the ever-changing view outside his windshield. After a decade of saving and planning, he finally set out from his home in Seattle, determined to drive all the way to the southern tip of Texas, capturing the hidden beauty of America's back roads along the way. His car was his sanctuary, packed with camera gear, a cooler full of snacks, and a well-worn atlas marked with places he'd always wanted to see. He was careful, methodical, and always trusted his instincts. traits that had kept him safe through years of solo travel. But nothing could have prepared him for what he would encounter on a lonely stretch of highway in the deserts of New Mexico. The first days of Daniel's journey were everything he'd hoped for. He drove through the misty forests of Oregon, crossed the snow-capped peaks of the Rockies, and wandered through the red canyons of Utah. His camera capturing sunsets and storms, wild horses, and ghost towns. He slept in his car or in cheap motels, always keeping his doors locked and his wits about him. He avoided big cities, preferring the quiet of small towns and the solitude of empty highways. The road was his companion, and he relished every mile. By the time he reached New Mexico, Daniel was exhausted but exhilarated. The landscape was stark and beautiful, the sky an endless dome of blue. He spent a day exploring the ruins of an old mining town, then set out in the late afternoon, planning to drive for a few hours before finding a place to sleep. The highway was nearly empty, the only other vehicles the occasional pickup truck or battered RV. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Daniel felt a familiar sense of peace, the kind that only comes when you're far from everything and everyone. As dusk deepened, Daniel began looking for a safe place to pull over and rest. He spotted a small gravel turnout just off the highway, partially hidden by a stand of scrubby mesquite. It was nothing fancy, just enough space for his car and a view of the open desert. He parked, rolled down the windows to let in the cool evening air, and settled back with his journal, jotting down notes about the day's travels. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant call of a coyote and the whisper of wind through the brush. Daniel felt safe, cocooned in his car, lulled by the rhythm of the road and the beauty of the night. He must have dozed off, because the next thing he knew, it was pitch dark. He woke with a start, heart pounding, unsure what had roused him. For a moment, he listened. Nothing but the sound of his own breathing and the faint rustle of the wind. He checked his phone. 2:13 a.m. He debated whether to keep driving, but fatigue won out. He locked the doors, reclined his seat, and closed his eyes. A sharp noise jolted him awake. At first, he thought it was a dream, a metallic scraping, faint but insistent, coming from beneath the car. He sat up, every nerve on edge, and listened. The sound came again, louder this time, followed by the unmistakable crunch of gravel. Someone was outside, moving around his car. Daniel's mind raced. He reached for his phone, but there was no signal, just the mocking words, "No service," glowing in the darkness. He considered honking the horn, but feared it might provoke whoever was out there. Instead, he sat perfectly still, straining to see through the fogged windows. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the moonlight, crouched near the back tire. Daniel's blood ran cold. The person was dressed in dark clothes, face hidden by a hood. He watched in horror as the figure pulled something from a bag, a length of metal with sharp spikes, and began laying it behind the rear wheels of his car. Daniel realized, with a sickening jolt, that it was a homemade spike strip, the kind used by police to stop fleeing vehicles. Whoever these people were, they were setting a trap. Panic surged through Daniel. He scanned the area, spotting two more figures lurking in the shadows, one near the front of the car, the other standing watch at the edge of the turnout. He was boxed in, alone, miles from help. He thought of his family, his friends, the life he'd built. He refused to become another statistic, another unsolved mystery on a lonely stretch of highway. He weighed his options. If he stayed put, he risked being attacked when the men realized he was awake. If he tried to drive away, he'd hit the spike strip and be stranded, at their mercy. He needed a distraction, something to buy him time. Daniel remembered the emergency whistle on his keychain, a gift from his sister. He grabbed it, took a deep breath, and blew as hard as he could. The shrill sound pierced the night, startling the men outside. For a split second, they froze, looking around in confusion. Daniel seized the moment. He started the car, slammed it into reverse, and gunned the engine, swerving hard to the left. The car lurched over the gravel, narrowly missing the spike strip, and shot back onto the highway. The men shouted, one of them throwing something that struck the rear window with a loud crack. Daniel didn't look back. He floored the accelerator, the car fishtailing on the loose gravel before catching traction on the asphalt. His heart pounded as he sped down the highway, headlights cutting through the darkness. For miles, Daniel drove in a blind panic, checking the mirrors for any sign of pursuit. The road was empty, the only sound the roar of the engine and his own ragged breathing. He didn't stop until he reached a brightly lit gas station on the outskirts of a small town. He stumbled inside, shaking, and told the clerk what had happened. The police were called, but by the time they arrived, the men and the spike strip were long gone. Daniel spent the rest of the night in the gas station, too shaken to sleep. The reality of how close he'd come to disaster hit him in waves. How a simple decision to pull over in the wrong place at the wrong time had nearly cost him everything. He called his family, his voice trembling as he recounted the story. His mother wept, his father raged, his sister told him to come home. But Daniel was determined to finish his journey, to reclaim the sense of freedom that had always drawn him to the road. The next day, he had the car checked for damage, grateful to find only a cracked taillight and a few scratches. He pressed on, but the experience changed him. He became hyper-vigilant, avoiding isolated turnouts, never sleeping in the car unless he was in a well-lit, populated area. He trusted his instincts, listened to the small voice that warned him when something felt off. The road was still his sanctuary, but he understood, in a way he never had before, how thin the line between safety and danger truly was. Daniel's story became a warning he shared with fellow travelers in online forums and coffee shops, at campgrounds and truck stops. He urged others to trust their instincts, to stay alert, to never take the road for granted. He learned that his experience was not unique, that others had encountered similar traps, that the highways were not as safe as they seemed. If you've ever traveled alone, if you've ever felt the hair on the back of your neck stand up for no reason, you know how quickly a peaceful journey can turn into a nightmare. The open road is a place of freedom, but it's also a place where danger can wait in the shadows, where a single mistake can change everything. So the next time you set out on a road trip, remember, Daniel, trust your instincts, stay alert, and never, ever ignore the feeling that something isn't right. Because sometimes, the scariest monsters aren't the ones you see coming. They're the ones that wait in the dark, silent and patient, for you to let your guard down. And if you have a story like this, if you've ever escaped a situation that could have ended in tragedy, please share it in the comments below. Your experience could be the warning that saves someone else's life. Don't keep your story to yourself. Let it be a light for others in the darkness. And if you've made it this far, if these stories have made you think twice about the road, I urge you to subscribe to Verified Fears Horror Stories channel. Join our community of survivors, listeners, and believers, and help us spread the word that vigilance and courage can make all the difference. Stay safe out there. Hold your loved ones close, and remember, every mile is a gift. Don't let fear keep you from living, but never forget that the world can change in a heartbeat. Your story matters. Share it. And let's keep each other safe on the road ahead.